Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We saw the Prime Minister chair meeting on the electricity bills protests that we've seen recently. We've seen the price hike there. We've also seen him say, particularly as far as the policy framework is concerned, there should be a policy framework to tackle with theft, line losses, all of that. There's also going to be a consultation between the CMs on this very important issue. We'll be talking about what initiatives the government is taking to tackle this very real problem being faced across the board as far as increase in electricity prices are concerned. What do we expect in the near future, and how does the government aim to tackle this? Particularly the kind of resolve that we are seeing, the meeting being continued tomorrow, being chaired by the Prime Minister. A little later on, we'll also be talking about the currency exchange and the IMF's role. As far as stakeholders are concerned, they're putting a lot of blame on IMF in terms of regulation increase and all of that. We'll be talking about that, and what kind of increase or what kind of a trend can we predict for the near future as far as currency rates are concerned. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me today Osama Rizvi, who is an energy and economic analyst. Thank you for joining us today. We also have with us Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed, who is a professor, Energy Center, Comsats University, former advisor to UNDP. Also, thank you for being with us today. Ji, Osama, we've seen, I think as consumers, all of us feel the increase at this time as far as the power tariff is concerned, as far as electricity prices across the board are concerned. There is a very real problem here. There are, of course, protests happening. There is also, the way that I want to particularly talk about why we are facing this problem, and of course, we are looking at meetings being held to try to come to some sort of a solution with this. But overall, what do you feel is the main reason for the kind of increase that we are looking
at? Certainly. So there are always two reasons, mostly. Some are external, some are internal. If we look at this particular case where we have surging power tariffs across the world, actually, so Pakistan is not isolated from the world. Especially what happened after Russia-Ukrainian war, I would say the main problem with this equation is our imported fuel items. So Pakistan creates most of its energy from fossil fuels, about 61%. And within that, there are two prime resources. One is natural gas, and the other is coal. Out of this natural gas, about 25 to 30% is imported. And the coal we are using, almost 70 to 75% of it is imported. And now it is becoming clear that why I said that there are international factors at the play as well. You see, after the Russian-Ukrainian war, the energy prices across the world has touched record highs. Coal prices were at one point the highest in history, in recent history. Natural gas prices recently just turned a little, reduced a little bit, but they are still 3 or 4 times their 5-year or 10-year moving averages. So that is one part. Now comes the internal part. So Pakistan naturally has to pay a lot of dollars to get all of these imports, and we all know that Pakistan is very low on reserves.
As I understand, there are some 976 billion gap between the liability and the revenue that we are generating at this time, and that accounts for a lot of the problem also.
Absolutely. So Pakistan is supposed to pay around $75 to $80 billion in the next 3 years in total. And that also speaks a lot about our love affair with IMF, but that is for a later part. But what I'm trying to get at is that, so that was the international part, and our low reserves, the political crisis that engulfed the country during the previous few months, that the lack of focus and attention all on the major energy issues by the policymakers, delayed decisions, all of that took us to this point where we're standing right now. And I am not although one should be an optimist, but also one should be a realist as well. And I'm not really hopeful that these sessions and meetings and emergency measures would do any good for the people, because we have to face it that
Okay,
when a
let me
policy
come
of the
back
state
to
is,
you, Osama.
yeah,
Let me come
yeah,
back to you. I'm
yeah.
going to go to Dr. Iftikhar ji. Iftikhar sahab, I hope you heard what Osama is saying. He's been taking us through some of the reasons for the problem at this time. As far as these reasons are concerned, they do stand. But where we can make a difference, where we can make changes, of course, policy framework, of course, theft, those account for huge gaps also. Isn't that true? I mean, there's a huge part of the population that is paying a price for theft in this area. Isn't that true?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting. You are right, truly. The theft damages, especially all the line losses, which were traditionally classified as line losses, which are not actually line losses. They are management failure or lack of management losses. And the price has to be paid by the genuine and disciplined and law-abiding consumers of all the discos in the country. And of course, this can be handled by the management of different.
Iftikhar,
Yes.
why have we till now been unable to do so? And numerous governments have been in place, numerous governments have come and gone. Unfortunately, our inability to try to get this theft to account for a minimum is unfortunately we haven't been successful there. Why, in your opinion?
I think the after the 18th Amendment in the country, if you will see, there was a certain work which was need to be done for decentralization of power structure of the energy production and power management companies like Pakistan Electricity Energy Power Company. Uh, the disco interaction of the discos, just generating the distribution and NTDC, as well as the generation agencies in Pakistan, that is not aligned yet. And the provinces were to be given sovereignty and authority to decide about on tariff locally. So our issue is decentralization of power, decentralization of management of energy distribution system. Of
So you're
course, it
saying,
should cooperate.
so correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that the provinces are unable to manage, try to come down on this theft or to manage it to get to the, to get to the root of the problem there, to be able to, somehow redress this theft that's happening on a provincial level.
No, I think the province are not authorized. There, you can see. Last week I heard the news that the discos are being handed over to the provinces now. 18th Amendment. I mean, it was passed decade ago. I remember in U.S. aid project, I was part of this in country from 14 to 19. We devised a technology to detect and identify power theft at consumer level. And I'm sure one of the professor in UET Peshawar was there. And still this technology is nowhere. And USAID was ready to implement and fund the cost of the management. So I think the issue is with renegotiating and redefining the role of provinces after the 18th Amendment power decentralization system.
But isn't it true that it's not? Let me go to Osama and then I'll come back to you. Osama, isn't it true that it's less a question of technology when the at this time and through successive governments, we've been able to identify where the theft is happening. Isn't that true?
So, as Dr. Saab has mentioned as well, I agree, and I've written about it as well, that there is no lack of solutions overall. Even if you talk about economy, even if you talk about our currency, you talk about energy, the solutions are there. But the problem is that the focus and the will to implement those solutions isn't there. So all the professors in Pakistan or foreign citizens living abroad, they can offer multiple solutions, but are we willing to implement those solutions? This essentially really is it's more of a crisis of morality than an economic and energy crisis. If everyone was doing what they were supposed to do, believe me, this wouldn't be there. For instance, the transmission and distribution losses and handling other inefficiencies can save up about 25% of the energy being wasted. We can save around 300 to 400 billion Pakistani rupees by just focusing on these leakages. These are facts and figures, not my opinion. So it turns out that we have not been able to focus on these important parts, and we are paying the price of delayed decision making at the moment.
Right, fair enough. Let me come back to you. We have with us Musa Khan Durrani, who is CEO Axial Consulting. He's also an energy expert. Can you hear me, Musa sir?
Yes, Mahrukh, I can hear you.
As far as how big an issue are IPPs and the capacity payments there, in your opinion, as far as, and how much does it contribute to the crisis overall?
Right. So I think, of course, if you see, the capacity payments are a huge component, in at least in absolute terms, in the overall, cost. However, I think, it often takes the perspective away from the T&D losses that my fellow panelists just mentioned. I was listening to them keenly. So I personally feel capacity payments are a little, or at least they get a little harsher treatment. So, for instance, the basic structure of any tariff has this essential component of capacity payments because you have a single buyer market right now. So in that, any investor would like to have its return secured. Secondly, a big chunk of your capacity payment is in the shape of loans, which have to be repaid to the financiers. So I think it is more of an issue of low demand rather than high, capacity payments. We have seen deindustrialization over the last several years. We don't see any demand impetus coming, which could come in the shape of, let's say, EVs. So I think these are some of the factors which kind of balloon the capacity payments when we see them on per unit basis. But I mean, generally, if you ask me, I think there are several steps that the government can take. First and foremost could be to renegotiate some of the IPP contracts, whereby they can actually increase the loan tenors and thereby, reduce the impact. Secondly, as I said, over medium term, they'll have to, of course, encourage industrialization and also, introduce initiatives like electric vehicles, which would not only reduce your imports.
Musa, in your opinion, what is the maximum relief that the government can provide, realistically speaking, within the constraints that they are, the ambit with which they're operating, in which there is the issue, like you said, of balance payments. There's an issue of, the debt, as in the gap between liability and revenue, all of those things. What is the maximum, in your opinion, that the government can do at this time for people?
So I think solutions are simple, but they're not easy, clearly. Okay. And we also have to realize that this cost-through mechanism might be, a necessary step, but it's clearly not sustainable, and neither it's sufficient. In the short term, unfortunately, I don't think there's much the government can do, except perhaps I was reading they're thinking of introducing longer installment plans for the consumers. They might also review the taxes and surcharges, because you see, essentially, some of these taxes, in fact, most of these taxes are extremely regressive, and in which the honest customers end up paying for the follies of the government and inefficiencies of the government. So if over the short term they can reduce the taxes, but of course, given the IMF conditions, it has to be seen how much of that would be possible. So a short answer, I don't think government has much fiscal space.
Right. Let me come back to you, Musa. I'm going to go to Osama. Osama, what about, there's a lot that is being said on social media about free, free units that are given to, for example, WABDA and other people who, are entitled in that in different categories. How much of a difference is that going to make? Is that, and realistically speaking, does that make a lot of difference?
I don't think so. See, Pakistan is facing a shortfall of about 6,000 plus 6,500 megawatts at the moment, and I'm not very hopeful that this particular measure would be beneficial in this regard. I think what we can do, as the other guest rightfully mentioned, in the short run, there aren't any opportunities or possibilities. However, we have to have a holistic policies. We are talking about economic leakages, right? So there is a need to save money. And how can the money be saved? We have to look at import substitution. There was a recent study out there that opined that just by improving our refining capacity and upgrading the refineries, Pakistan can save something to the tune of 10 billion US dollars. And now, when that amount of money is saved, you can use them in, for example, buying more LNG contracts, buying more coal for the longer run. So the point right now I'm trying to make is that we should be looking outside the energy sector as well to resolve the issue of energy within Pakistan.
In terms of when you say short term or long term, what is short term? And let me go to Iftikhar Sahab on this. I mean, are people who are protesting outside, a lot of these people are also who are like I said, less than 200 units, or for example madrasas, for example, very very small schools also. Are these commercial users? Where do they come in? And there are instances where they're also feeling that they're even when there is not even that much usage, like I said, sometimes 200, sometimes even less than that, that there is the bills and overall have jumped. So how are we going to be able to deal with that?
You're talking about the consumers. Mostly protest is now from the consumer. And remember, only 38% our production is used by industry. Industries are always under suppression. And I will just add, it's very important, 19,000 megawatt was your total estimate. I'm giving you NTTC figures. 19,000 megawatt in 2012, and by 2022 it is 31,000 megawatt. And how you are progressing, you can imagine. By 2030, the global target, India will be third in the world in solarization, shifting from from fossil to green energy. We will be 27th in the region. And remember
I
that
want to come to that. Why have we not been able to shift to solar? And of course we've seen different initiatives happen through different governments, but why is there this constant failure for us to make that shift? You yourself have mentioned that we are 27th there.
Yes, mostly since industrial growth is ceased since years. Consumer consumption is low. I think economic condition, the consumers are not able to get the solar at the reasonable price. They cannot. The government subsidy is required. Essentially, it should be required. The net metering ratio, the figures of all discos are very pathetic. Only LESCO, ESCO, and one other disco, three discos are in Pakistan which are giving, and they are improving their net metering connections with the pace. Of course, energy financing is world over. It is phenomena for since decades, from world over. Why Pakistan government is not financing, and the private sector is not encouraged to give energy economic incentives financed by the solar and off-grid systems. Never. We are actually spending billions on distribution system. We are revamping our distribution. It is essential. It is required, of course, required, and US is part of it. But remember, the only solution is local generation, off-grid, decentralized generation. You will save in distribution cost. You will save in uh, all costs of dams, charge, storage capacities, a lot of things. And Pakistan is blessed with this sunshine and bioresource. The world best biomass energy can be from here.
Osama,
And
talking
river
about
system.
decentralization, which is what Dr. Iftikhar is, has just mentioned also. Why don't we, is it feasible for us to come towards privatization, or is it better, giving it to provinces? Because a lot of that is also under discussion as far as discourse are concerned. What is your opinion on this?
I personally believe that probably the PPP framework, like public-private partnerships, can be quite useful in this regard. Total privatization has its own pros and cons. Total nationalization has its own pros and cons. But somewhere in the middle might be a good model in Pakistan to test and trial for it. In terms of, I would like to add to Dr. Iftikhar's point, in terms of solarization, Pakistan in fact uses only 0.071% of its land for solar panels. But the main question is that in terms of financing, the energy costs, the electricity costs have gone up 90% in the previous 5 years, while incomes have mostly stagnated or decreased. So in that scenario, if you go to a bank, that is going to charge you 27% interest rate to install a solar panel that would cost you about anywhere between 2 million to 4 million. So the main thing is the economic well-being of our individual population. That is a big hiatus as well in implementing the solar system for Pakistan.
Right, fair enough. Let me go to Musa. Musa, as far as we're talking about providing solutions, you said that there don't seem to be any short-term solutions. What about the protests at this time, as far as the government facing in terms of, like you said, perhaps installments, in terms of rebates? The government can only offer what it has, and as an all-time, and in terms of funds, in terms of what we have available. Are there any short-term solutions in your opinion?
So I think one of the possible solutions could be, government can actually defer some of the tariff adjustments to winter months, specifically November and December, because typically your electricity consumption is low in those months, and it will be easier for the consumers to absorb those costs. So this could be one short-term measure. Others could be simply, rationalizing the sales tax and your surcharges in a way that they become less regressive. So higher slab consumers should be able to pay more of those charges compared to the low slab consumers. This, of course, could be a good short-term measure, but would it make major difference? I'm still not sure, but definitely some sort of relief could still be extracted.
Right, fair enough. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this segment. We'll be taking a short break, after which we'll be talking about currency, exchange rate overall, and of course IMF's role in that, and what can we expect, the kind of trend we may expect in the future. We'll be right back after a short break. Please stay with us. Right, welcome back. We have with us Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, who's former advisor to Ministry of Finance. Dr. Khaqan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mahrukh.
Dr. Khaqan, we've, of course, a huge concern is, of course, the exchange rate at this time. To what do you attribute this unnatural increase? Would you first of all call it unnatural? Because of course, we all are feeling the pinch as far as the exchange rate is concerned. There's also experts saying that it is largely due to an unnatural degree of involvement from the IMF. What do you say to that?
So here's the deal. I think when we went to the IMF, everyone expected the fund monies, the Saudi monies, the UAE monies, which did come into Pakistan, and Pakistan's reserves went all the way up to $8 billion, would help stabilize the currency. But what we didn't remember was that Pakistan's inflation was running somewhere around 30%. The inflation of our trading partners is running at about what, 6, 7, 8%. So there is an inherent gap of 22, 24%, right? So your rupee should lose, good 5, 6 rupees, which is about 1.5, 2%, because there is an inflation gap. So start from that point of view. Then we opened the imports as we agreed with the funds. There is a backlog. There is a clearance of the containers. There are clearance of the dividends. So there is definitely a pressure there also. Unfortunately, our remittances, because there was uncertainty in the country, have gone down in July and have dropped by a substantive 19% year on year. So the inflow, the supply of dollars has been less than what one would have expected. Then we signed with the IMF. I am not sure if that was something Pakistan would have been keen to sign. Maybe it could have been negotiated harder. That Pakistan's interbank market, which has different dynamics, which operates differently, which has different customers, which has a different size, will chase the open market, which is smaller in size, has different dynamics, is more individual prone rather than the interbank, which is more. I think there are 29 licensees of banks who can operate there, very different markets. So that market is chasing the open market to ensure an IMF structural benchmark which says the difference will not be more than 1.25% between these two markets, which continues to be more than 1.25%. So that is another reason. The other reason is to stabilize inflation. We are still looking at those fiscal deficit to come down. We are still looking at the supply side to improve.
The immediate effect of the IMF deal, we saw, the dollar go down a little bit and then re-emerge and, skyrocket. Was that expected to some extent because of inflation?
I think it was expected because of inflation, but it was also some of the numbers that came in July. Mahrukh, you had a surplus of current account for the past couple of months. As your remittances dropped, as your exports stagnated, and as the imports opened, because we had agreed with the fund and went to, I think, 4.1 or 4.2 billion from 3.7 billion earlier, there was a current account deficit of $809 million in July. So what does that mean? That means that you were short on the supply of dollars. So you went negative on the current account. That also brought your state bank reserves down from somewhere above $8 billion to now $7.9 billion. So all these are indicators to me that the high frequency indicators do point to a fact that the rupee is under pressure. All these now need to be reversed. And we are trying to reach a new equilibrium. You know that the new government is more open to exchange rate being managed by the supply and demand and not intervention. I think State Bank is also pulled back from letting the LCs open more. So as the LCs open, there is more demand for the dollars. I think all these factors are playing in. Then the last thing is that unfortunately in the open market, the sentiment of holding dollars as a store of value is not going away. That remains to be the driving force in terms of savings. It's not gold, it's not property, it's not investment. It remains to be the dollar asset which people want to have, or a hard currency asset. So there is dollarization. And that market is being chased by the interbank, and that's why you see this drop. I think the best way to get out of this in the short run is that the timely inflow of the external support, whether that's the 9 billion pledged in Geneva, picking up remittances to again 2.5 billion, the exports to 2.5 billion, and still maintaining some curbs on the import, at least on the non-essential ones, on the cars. I mean, I can change my car 5 years down the road instead of 2 to 3 years because the country is in difficulty. And also improvement on the agriculture front would help. So the good news
Let
is
me
that our crops are coming bumper. So I'm hoping that the import needs on the cotton, on the wheat, on the on lentils would be substantively lower what it was last year. So I
Let me
think
go to
that's the overall picture.
Osama, Dr. Khaqan. I'll just come back to you. Osama, the caretaker minister has said that we can take exports up to 80 billion. How realistic do you think that is in the current climate? Do you think it's achievable at all?
I personally think that is not realistic at all. It's a good analogy would be to that of the recently Russian oil, right? When the Russian oil was being imported, everyone expected that our petrol prices will be slashed by 100 rupees or something like that, and it turns out nothing happened because what these rhetorical statements ignore or do not take account of is the fact that there seems to be structural issues in Pakistan's economy that are play in almost everything. So we're
But
discussing
Osama,
the
when we talk
devaluation.
about these trends, when we talk about these predictables, we know that there are structural problems. There have been for ages, and our inability
Yes.
to deal with those structural problems is also through successive governments.
Yes. So that is the issue. I mean, I term it as the short termism in policy making. So there are 7 to 10 structural issues. One of them is the crisis of confidence and the uncertainty, prevalent uncertainty Pakistan has around its future direction. I believe, apart from the noise of numbers that come out every day, that seems to be the core reason for the currency's devaluation, along with international crises where we've seen rising energy cost abroad and hence a fall in remittances as well. So to the question that why haven't we solved these structural issues, I'll revert back to the previous segment that our focus has been somewhere else. But the point is, I think we're reaching a tipping point and things can't continue even in purely economic and financial terms. And there has to be, somebody has to take some steps in short.
Okay, fair enough. Speaking of taking steps, Dr. Khaqan, we are now, talking, we are now in the midst, at least the start of a caretaker government. In this kind of a scenario, we've been talking about, with you also, for a while about the importance of structural reforms and how Pakistan's unfortunate inability, our inability to ensure that those happen, whether, through, like I said, a few governments that have just been. But the question is, as far as this caretaker government is concerned, how realistic a possibility is it for us to be able to make those structural reforms, to take those decisions now?
So, Mahrukh, I mean, my take on Pakistan is that, I mean, we have a lot of potential to realize, whether it's in revenues, whether it's in investments from abroad, the FDI, whether it's getting our minerals out, whether it's improving our agriculture productivity, whether it's improving the energy sector. And lastly, all of them to play into writing a growth strategy for Pakistan, which is not based on foreign financing, but which is based on all the things that I've just talked about. Now, the caretakers in the short run, let's say 6 months or so, I'm just going by the Election Commission, what they feel on this. Pakistan has this time a different caretaker setup. It is more empowered in the sense that the constitution has empowered them to do a couple of things more than the last caretakers, especially in the ongoing areas of the multilaterals, triple P, privatization, intergovernmental deals. So we'd hope for them to do that. They are almost here for double the time of a normal caretaker, so they can do that. Secondly, I think the establishment is on to doing a couple of things now, including SIFC, which is our investment vehicle to
Yes.
move on the investments with Saudi Arabia, UAE, CPEC 2, on the agriculture front, on the IT front, number of projects are being put. So, that impetus is there as well on the side. So the caretaker expectation becomes higher as the establishment moves on this. Then there is the initiative land information management systems, which in the short run can also help. In the short run, meaning here a year or so, on the agriculture front, and I hope there is connectivity there. So the caretakers would be delivering far ahead of what the previous caretakers have been
You
doing.
think as far as agriculture and mining is concerned, this recent push in that direction is going to yield perhaps faster results for us?
So, Mahrukh, in December, I wrote an article last December, which was rocks and crops. I've been trained in Australia, and Australia does rocks and it does crops, and it sells this all over the world. And I said, it is exactly the same potential Pakistan has. Our recordate potential, our copper potential, our magnesium potential. It may start to be realized in a couple of years down the road, but it was also in the 70s that we got the Sui gas, and we've been benefiting from it for a very long time. We should not forget that fact. On the crops potential, I am more bullish on the crops than I am on anything else. And the reason is that there is a large farmland that can be cultivated. There is also a large productivity gap between what the farmers are doing today and what can be done if we were to improve the seed, the mechanization, the technology, more information, the route, meaning logistics, and it is happening in the 2% of the farmers in Pakistan. So that's the tragedy. The small farmers, the 95 to 98%, have yields which are much lower. But then there are the big progressive farmers who have all this that I'm pointing to you and are already producing wheat 50% higher in terms of productivity compared to the others. What the LIMS is trying to do is to bridge this gap first and then see what it is internationally. In Pakistan, a long time ago, I think it was Mahbubul Haq who said that we can be the food basket for the Middle Eastern countries. I still think that is true. If they can get water from India, I'm sure they can get a lot of agriculture produce from Pakistan. And then if Pakistan becomes part of this route that we are becoming with China, it can start exporting to the neighboring countries, meaning Iran, meaning the Middle Eastern countries, meaning China itself. It can also transform the $10 billion of import bill that we get in terms of the agriculture and reduce that substantively. The reason we get into a current account deficit is not that we have a $35 billion gap. The gap is somewhere between 10, $12 billion that you need to sort out. Let's say your exports were to go up, a couple of $1 billion on the imports of agriculture were to come down, and your remittances were to come back to decent levels, you will become sustainable. I'm not happy with a 28, $30 billion export. That's for a country like Pakistan, that's not something that one should be looking at. This is 8 to 9% of GDP. Pakistan should be targeting 12 to 13% of GDP.
Yes.
But what I'm trying to say is that in the short run, we'd solve this issue.
Whereas what Dr. Khaqan is talking about, a couple of years, okay, that's also we need to keep a huge time frame in mind in terms of what we want economically, and the road is long and hard, and you and I, I'm sure, agree on that. But the question is, what is the immediate couple of months looking like in terms of the trend as far as dollar is concerned? Is there any way to stem this increase? And is it again due to IMF's involvement? How are you looking at the future couple of months, so to speak? Sorry, Osama.
Was that question?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So I believe in the shorter run, we need to do, first of all, we need to implement some fiscal discipline. So Pakistan indeed has a huge potential, but for Pakistan to survive until to the point to realize that potential, we need to ensure our own survival, right? So by fiscal discipline, I mean that we need to address the leakages, economic leakages, especially in the state-owned enterprises. SIFC, as Dr. Saab has mentioned, and Pakistan Sovereign Wealth Fund seems to be the right steps moving forward. But once again, I would be keenly observing the progress. So, because there has been quite a many steps before as well. Secondly, we need to look at the energy sector, the thing we were discussing earlier on, because as you know, as an individual, if you don't have energy, you can't perform no matter how much potential you have. Similarly, the industry, the country cannot do anything. Our exports cannot rise, let alone to $60 billion rather than $80 billion, if the adequate energy supply
Where
isn't
is it going to
ensured to
continue?
the. Sorry?
Osama, is it going to continue, in your opinion, this trend upward as far as the dollar is concerned?
Yes, because I look at one other indicator, which is the Federal Reserve Bank of America's interest rate cycle. And I believe that they would have one or two more rate hikes before they start unwinding it. Up until that, I do not believe that the pressure on Pakistani
Is there
rupee will
any
go anywhere.
hope of it coming down? Because, you know, there's a lot, of course, being said as far on social media also, that once it goes up to this level, at best, it's going to stop but not come down. Is that true?
I don't think so, because if you look at, I don't know if we have the time to go into the details, but if you look at the major US economic indicators, it seems that the economy is still resilient in many ways, and that would really force Fed to keep up its interest rate
So it's
hiking cycle
possible
at
that it
least
may come down,
two more times.
unfortunately. So it's possible that you're saying it may come
Sorry?
down. Let's all, I'm saying, so you're hopeful that it may come down. There is a possibility.
Not before the end of this year, probably next year, not before that.
Fair enough, fair enough. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Thank you so much for joining us, Osama Rizvi. Thank you for your very valuable time. Of course, at this time, as far as the situation overall is concerned, we see a caretaker government battling with trying to ensure that they can provide any and all relief to those, all of us who are impacted by the electricity tariff increase, by the overall bills that are being, the protests that are ensuing, and the hue and cry that is being raised. Let's hope that they can do that. The Prime Minister is going to continue chairing a meeting tomorrow on the same issue, working towards trying to provide a solution. Of course, one hopes that the dollar also is able, as far as the economy is concerned, we can take those cumulative measures that will try to put the economy back on track. Thank you so much for joining us today on